The snow came down heavy that Thanksgiving night. Every house on the street glowed warm from the inside. Families gathered around tables. Laughter spilled through frosted windows. But on the front porch of the modest home at the end of the block, there was no warmth at all. Marlene Vance stood frozen. Her hands hung at her sides. Behind her, three small girls huddled together in coats too thin for the weather. The oldest was 8. Her name was Cora. She held her sister's hands so tight her knuckles had gone white. Her eyes moved back and forth between her mother and the door that had just slammed shut behind them. Through the frosted glass, a man's shape moved away into the house. His voice still hung in the cold air. He had called them dead weight. He had told them to figure out their own lives. He had not looked at the children when he said it. Marlene's brother-in-law, Derek. The man who had inherited everything after her husband died 6 months ago. The man who had promised to help. The man who had just thrown a single suitcase onto the porch and locked the door. Marlene bent down slowly. Her hands shook as she picked up the suitcase. It was small. It held almost nothing. She turned and looked at her daughters. None of them had gloves. The youngest, Penny, was only 4. Tears ran down her cheeks, but she pressed her lips together hard. She was trying not to make any sound. She had learned that crying made adults angry. Cora pulled her sisters closer. She did not cry. She did not speak. She just watched her mother with eyes too old for her face. Marlene turned back to the door. She knocked again. Once. Twice. The sound was hollow against the wood. Inside, footsteps moved away. The television turned on. No one came. She knocked a third time. Her voice cracked when she called out, "Derek, please. It's freezing." The girls. The words died in her throat. The door stayed closed. Across the street, a motorcycle sat parked outside a house with no decorations, no lights in the windows, no wreath on the door. On the porch, a man sat alone in a worn chair. His name was Earl Bruckner. He was 53 years old. He wore a black leather jacket with patches that made most people cross the street to avoid him. Earl had lived alone since his wife passed. He had not spoken to a neighbor in over a year. He did not go to church. He did not wave when cars drove by. He fixed motorcycles in his garage and he kept to himself. That was his life now. A cigarette burned between his fingers. He had been sitting there for an hour, watching the snow fall, thinking about nothing. But now he was not thinking about nothing. He watched Marlene knock on the door again. He watched the door stay closed. He watched the woman's shoulders drop. He watched her turn back to her daughters with nothing to offer them. The 6-year-old had started to shake. Not just shiver. Shake. Her whole body trembled against her sister's side. Earl's jaw tightened. He brought the cigarette to his lips, but did not inhale. The oldest girl, Cora, turned her head. She looked across the street. She looked directly at him. There was no hope in her eyes. No silent plea. No expectation. She looked at him the way a child looks at a locked door. Like she already knew no one would open it. Like she had stopped believing adults would help a long time ago. Earl had seen that look before. A long time ago. In a different place. On a different face. The cigarette burned down between his fingers. The ash fell onto the porch. He did not notice. The youngest girl, Penny, lifted her hands to her mouth and breathed on them. Her fingers were turning red. The tips were starting to go pale. Earl stood up. The chair creaked under his weight. His boots were heavy on the wooden porch. He was a big man. Broad shoulders. Thick arms. The kind of man people moved away from in grocery store aisles. He flicked the cigarette into the snow. It hissed and died. He had not spoken to a stranger in months. He had not wanted to. The world outside his garage had nothing for him anymore. That was what he had told himself. That was what he had believed. But he could not look away from Penny's bare hands. He could not look away from Cora's hollow eyes. He could not look away from Marlene standing on that porch with nowhere to go and no one coming to help. Something old stirred in his chest. Something he had buried deep after the funeral. Something painful and sharp and impossible to ignore. Earl stepped off the porch. His boots sank into the fresh snow. He did not know what he was going to say. He did not know what he could do, but he was already walking. 6 months before that frozen porch, Marlene Vance had a different life. It was not a rich life. It was not an easy life, but it was hers, and it was full. Tom worked construction. His hands were rough and his back hurt most nights, but he came home every evening with a smile for his girls. They lived in a rented apartment with thin walls and a kitchen so small 2 people could not stand in it at the same time. The furniture was secondhand. The carpet was stained. But the girls had their own room, and there was always food on the table. Tom used to carry Penny on his shoulders through the grocery store. He called her his little co-pilot. He helped Cora with her math homework, even when he was so tired he could barely keep his eyes open. He told Ivy her drawings were good enough to hang in a museum. He meant it. Marlene had never known what a real family looked like until she met Tom. She had aged out of foster care at 18 with nothing but a garbage bag of clothes and $62. She worked 2 jobs for 3 years before she walked into a diner and saw a man with sawdust in his hair ordering coffee. He asked her name. She told him. He came back every day for 2 weeks until she agreed to have dinner with him. That was 12 years ago. Now Tom was gone. The heart condition had no warning. One morning he kissed her goodbye. That afternoon he collapsed on a job site. By the time she got to the hospital, they had already stopped trying. Derek came to the funeral. He stood in the back row and left before the reception. 2 weeks later, he called Marlene and offered her the guest rooms in the family home. He said it was what Tom would have wanted. He said she could stay until she got back on her feet. Marlene believed him. She had no reason not to. At first, Derek was polite. He helped carry their boxes inside. He showed Cora where the bathroom was. He patted Penny on the head and said she looked just like her father. But after the first month, something shifted. Small comments started. Remarks about the grocery bill. Questions about why the girls were so loud. Complaints about toys left in the hallway. Marlene apologized every time. She cleaned more. She cooked dinner for him. She kept the girls in their room as much as possible. She took extra shifts at the diner, working doubles 3 days a week. But childcare ate most of what she earned. The numbers never worked out. Derek's girlfriend started coming around more often. She looked at Marlene like she was furniture that needed to be moved. She looked at the girls like they were stains on the carpet. Cora noticed. She always noticed. She started making her sisters eat faster at dinner so they could leave the table before Derek finished. She stopped asking for anything. She stopped talking unless someone asked her a question. Ivy drew more and more. She filled notebooks with pictures of houses and gardens and families sitting together. She never showed them to anyone except Penny. Penny still believed her father was watching from the sky. Every night before bed, she would wave at the window and whisper goodnight to him. She slept with a stuffed rabbit named Boo pressed against her chest. Boo had been a gift from Tom on her 3rd birthday. Marlene worked. She saved. She waited. She believed Derek's frustration would pass. She believed if she just tried harder, stayed quieter, made herself smaller, everything would be okay. She did not see the eviction coming. On Thanksgiving morning, she woke up early and baked a pie. Apple. Derek's favorite. She thought maybe if she did something kind, he would remember they were family. By evening, Derek told her to pack what she could carry. His girlfriend was coming for dinner. He wanted them gone before she arrived. He did not raise his voice. He did not look at the girls. He simply said it was time for Marlene to figure out her own life. Now Marlene stood on the porch again. Present time. The pie was still inside on the counter. Her phone was dead. Her wallet held $11 and some change. The nearest shelter was 7 miles away. The buses had stopped running 2 hours ago. The snow kept falling. Her daughters kept shaking. And across the street, a stranger in a leather jacket was walking toward her through the white silence. Marlene did not know his name. She did not know what he wanted. She only knew that her options had run out and her children were freezing. She pulled the girls closer and watched him come. Earl Bruckner stopped halfway across the street. His boots stood still in the fresh snow. He could see Marlene watching him, her body tense, her arms pulling the girls tighter. She did not know him. She only saw the jacket, the patches, the size of him. He understood. He had seen that look 1,000 times. 30 years ago, Earl came home from Vietnam to a country that did not want him. No parades, no thank yous, just silence and sideways glances. He drifted for 2 years, working odd jobs, sleeping in his truck, trying to forget the things he had seen. Then he met a group of men on motorcycles outside a bar in Nevada. They did not ask where he had been. They did not ask what he had done. They just handed him a beer and made room at the table. The club became his family. The road became his home. For the first time since the war, Earl felt like he belonged somewhere. Then he met Linda. She worked at a hardware store in a small town he was passing through. She had dark hair and a laugh that made him forget every bad thing he had ever seen. She was not afraid of him. She looked at him like he was just a man, not a monster. They were married within a year. Sadie came 2 years later. A little girl with her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn chin. Earl held her in the hospital and felt something shift inside his chest. He had spent years building walls around himself. Sadie walked right through them like they were made of paper. She used to sit on his lap while he worked on his motorcycle. She called him Papa Bear. She drew him pictures of dragons and princesses and hung them on the refrigerator with crooked magnets. She was 7 years old when a drunk driver ran a red light. Earl was the one who identified her body. He never rode the same after that. The club understood. They gave him space. Linda held him together for as long as she could. But some things break in ways that cannot be fixed. 23 years later, Linda got sick. Cancer. It started in her lungs and spread fast. Earl sat beside her hospital bed for 6 weeks. He held her hand when she took her last breath. Then he drove home and did not leave his house for a month. That was 4 years ago. Since then, Earl had lived alone. He fixed motorcycles in his garage. He drank beer on his porch. He talked to Linda's photo before bed and told her about his day, even though nothing ever happened. He kept Sadie's drawings in a box under his bed. Sometimes he took them out and looked at them. Sometimes he could not bring himself to open the box at all. The neighbors avoided him. Parents pulled their children closer when he walked past. The mailman left packages at the end of the driveway instead of coming to the door. Earl had accepted this. He had told himself it was easier this way. He had told himself he was done caring about the outside world. Tonight, he had planned to drink alone and watch old football recordings. He had no interest in Thanksgiving. The holiday only reminded him of tables that used to be full and chairs that were now empty. But then he heard the door slam across the street. He saw the woman and the children on the porch. He saw the suitcase hit the ground. He saw the smallest girl's bare hands. Something cracked open inside him. Something he had spent years sealing shut. Earl turned and walked back to his house. His hands moved faster than his mind. He grabbed his truck keys from the hook by the door. He pulled on a flannel shirt over his jacket. He did not stop to think about what he was doing. The truck was old, but it ran clean. He had rebuilt the engine himself 3 years ago. The heater worked. That was what mattered right now. Earl stepped off his porch and headed toward the driveway. The snow crunched under his boots. His breath came out in white clouds. Across the street, Marlene still stood frozen, watching him, not knowing if he was help or danger. He did not know what he was going to say to her. He did not know what he could offer. He had no money to speak of. His house was cold and cluttered and full of ghosts. But he had a truck with a working heater, and he could not sit still while children froze on Thanksgiving night. Earl opened the driver's side door. The hinges groaned in the cold. He looked across the street one more time. The smallest girl, Penny, had stopped crying. She was staring at him now. Her eyes were wide. Her lips were turning blue. Earl's jaw tightened. He climbed into the truck and started the engine. The truck pulled away from the curb. The heater hummed, steady and warm. In the back seat, the three girls sat pressed together, their thin coats still damp from the snow. Penny had stopped shivering for the first time in hours. Her small body relaxed against her sister's side. Marlene sat in the passenger seat, her back straight, her hands folded tight in her lap. She watched Earl from the corner of her eye. His face gave nothing away. He kept his eyes on the road. He did not ask questions. He did not make small talk. He simply drove. The silence should have felt uncomfortable. Instead, it felt safe, like standing in the eye of a storm. Ivy leaned forward and whispered to her mother, "Mama, where are we going?" Marlene did not have an answer. She looked at Earl. He glanced at her briefly, then back at the road. "Got a house a few blocks from here," he said. "Nothing fancy, but it is warm. You can stay until you figure out what comes next." Marlene's throat tightened. She had spent 6 months trying to ask for less, trying to take up less space, trying not to be a burden, and now a stranger was offering her more than her own family had given. Why? The word came out before she could stop it. Earl was quiet for a long moment. The windshield wipers swept back and forth, pushing snow aside. Finally, he spoke, "Because it is cold, and they are children." That was all he said. Marlene looked at her daughters in the rearview mirror. Cora was watching Earl with careful eyes, studying him the way she studied everyone. Ivy had her face pressed against the window, watching the snowy streets pass by. Penny was almost asleep, her head resting on Cora's shoulder. The truck turned onto a quiet street lined with small houses. Most of them glowed with Thanksgiving lights. One house sat dark at the end of the block. That was where Earl pulled into the driveway. He turned off the engine but did not move to get out. He looked at Marlene. I will not ask you what happened, he said. That is your business. But I will tell you this. You and your girls are safe here tonight. No one will bother you. No one will ask you to leave. Marlene felt something break inside her chest. Not a bad kind of breaking. More like a wall crumbling. She had been holding herself together for so long, holding everything in, trying to be strong for her daughters. Thank you. Her voice cracked on the words. Earl nodded once. Then he opened his door and stepped out into the cold. Marlene helped the girls out of the truck. The snow had slowed to a light dusting. The house in front of them was small and plain. The paint was peeling in places. The porch light flickered, but the front door was solid, and the windows were intact. And right now that was enough. Cora took Penny's hand and started toward the house, but then she stopped. She turned back to look at the truck. Mama, she said quietly. There is a car seat in the back. Marlene looked. She had not noticed it before. In the back seat, behind where Penny had been sitting, there was a child's car seat strapped in place. It was old. The fabric was faded and covered in a thin layer of dust. The buckles were rusted. It looked like it had not been used in a very long time. But it had never been removed. Marlene looked at Earl. He was standing on the porch now, his keys in his hand. He did not turn around. He did not explain. She thought about asking. She thought about the weight she had seen in his eyes when he looked at her daughters. She thought about the way he had offered help without asking for anything in return. Some things did not need to be spoken. Some losses were too heavy for words. Marlene took Cora's hand. She nodded toward the house. Come on, girls. Let's go inside. The front door opened with a creak. Earl stepped aside to let them enter. The house was cold but not freezing. He moved to the thermostat and turned it up. The heater clicked on with a low rumble. The living room was simple. A worn couch, a small television, a coffee table covered in motorcycle magazines. On the wall, there was a single framed photo, a woman with dark hair smiling at the camera. Penny tugged on Marlene's sleeve. Mama, who is that lady? Earl answered before Marlene could speak. His voice was quiet, steady. That was my wife. Her name was Linda. He did not say anything else. He walked into the kitchen and started making coffee. The girls looked at their mother. Marlene gently guided them to the couch and helped them sit down. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the heater hummed, and somewhere in the silence, a door that had been closed for years began to crack open. Penny was asleep before her head touched the cushion. Her body had given up fighting the cold hours ago. Now, wrapped in a worn blanket Earl had pulled from a closet, she finally let go. Her small chest rose and fell in steady rhythm. The stuffed rabbit named Boo was clutched tight against her cheek. Marlene sat on the edge of the couch, watching her youngest breathe. The room was simple, clean. A worn couch, a small television that looked like it had not been turned on in months, a coffee table with a few motorcycle magazines stacked neatly in the corner. The walls were mostly bare. No family photos except the one of Linda. No decorations, no clutter. It was the house of a man who had stopped expecting company a long time ago. Earl moved through the kitchen with quiet efficiency. He opened cabinets, pulled out bowls, set a pot on the stove. His movements were careful and practiced, like someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible in his own home. Ivy sat cross-legged on the floor near the couch. Her eyes moved around the room, searching. Finally, she spotted an old pencil on the coffee table. She picked it up, then pulled a napkin from her pocket. Within seconds, she was drawing. Her hand moved fast, creating shapes and lines that only she understood. Cora did not sit. She stood near the door, her back against the wall, her eyes tracking Earl wherever he went. She was 8 years old, but she watched like someone much older, like someone who had learned that adults could not always be trusted. Earl noticed. He did not say anything. He simply went about his work, giving her space. The soup was nothing special. Canned vegetable. He poured it into the pot and let it heat slowly. He sliced some bread and set it on a plate. He found an apple in the refrigerator and cut it into pieces. When the food was ready, he carried it to the coffee table and set it down gently. He did not make a speech. He did not ask them to eat. He just placed the food there and stepped back. Marlene looked at him. You did not have to do this. Earl shrugged. No child should be cold on Thanksgiving. That was all he said. He turned and walked toward the back door that led to the garage. He paused with his hand on the knob. He looked back at Marlene. Stay as long as you need. Door locks from the inside. Then he was gone. Marlene stared at the closed door for a long moment. She did not understand this man. She did not understand why he had helped them. She did not understand what he wanted in return. But her daughters were warm. There was food in front of them. And for the first time since Derek had slammed that door, she felt like she could breathe. "Mama." Ivy's voice was soft. She held up her napkin drawing. It was a picture of a house with smoke coming from the chimney. 4 stick figures stood in front of it. "Is this where we live now?" Marlene's chest ached. "Just for tonight, baby." Ivy nodded. She did not look sad. She looked thoughtful. Then she went back to drawing. Cora finally moved away from the wall. She walked slowly to the couch and sat down next to Penny. She did not touch the food. She just sat there, watching the door Earl had gone through. "He is strange," Cora said quietly. Marlene nodded. "Yes, but he is kind." Cora considered this. She did not argue. After a moment she reached for a piece of bread. The night stretched on. The heater hummed. The snow fell soft and steady outside the windows. Marlene ate slowly, letting the warmth of the soup settle into her bones. Ivy finished 3 napkin drawings and lined them up on the floor like a gallery. Penny slept without stirring. Eventually Marlene's eyes grew heavy. She leaned back on the couch and let herself rest. Just for a moment. Just to close her eyes. She woke hours later to darkness. The house was quiet. The heater still hummed. Penny and Ivy were curled together on the couch, fast asleep. But Cora was not beside them. Marlene sat up quickly. Her heart jumped. Then she saw her daughter sitting by the window, her face pressed close to the glass. "Cora." Marlene kept her voice low. "What are you doing?" Cora did not turn around. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I saw him, Mama. In the garage." Marlene moved to the window. She looked out at the small building behind the house. A single light glowed through the dusty window. "What did you see?" Cora was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was small and confused. "He was crying. All by himself. Like he did not want anyone to know." The garage light flickered once, then held steady. Earl sat on an old stool beside his workbench, surrounded by engine parts and tools he had not touched in weeks. A half-empty bottle of whiskey stood near his elbow. He had poured 1 glass but had not finished it. His hands rested on his knees. His eyes stared at nothing. The photographs were spread across the workbench. He had pulled them from a shoebox he kept hidden behind the paint cans. He did not look at them often. Most nights he could not bring himself to open the box at all. But tonight was different. Tonight, 3 little girls were sleeping in his living room, and the walls he had built around himself were crumbling. The first photograph showed a young girl on a swing. Her hair flew behind her as she reached toward the sky. Her smile was wide and fearless. She was 5 years old in that picture, 2 years before the accident. The second photograph showed a woman standing in a garden, her hands covered in soil, her eyes full of quiet joy. Linda. She had loved flowers. She had planted roses along the fence every spring until the cancer made her too weak to kneel. The third photograph showed a birthday cake with 7 candles. Sadie sat behind it, her cheeks puffed out, ready to blow. Earl stood beside her with his hand on her shoulder. He remembered that day. He remembered the wish she made. She had told him later that she wished for a puppy. They never got her the puppy. Earl closed his eyes. The memories came whether he wanted them or not. The day of the accident had been ordinary. Sadie was at a friend's house down the street. Linda was making dinner. Earl was in the garage, working on a carburetor. Then the phone rang. He did not remember the drive to the hospital. He did not remember what the doctors said. He only remembered walking into a small room and seeing his daughter lying still under a white sheet. Her face was peaceful. Her hands were folded across her chest. She looked like she was sleeping. But she was not sleeping. The drunk driver had run a red light at 40 miles an hour. Sadie had been in the back seat of her friend's mother's car. She was the only one who did not survive. Earl sat with her body for 3 hours. The nurses had to ask him to leave so they could take her away. He had not cried that night. He had not cried at the funeral. He did not cry until 6 months later, alone in this garage, with no one to see. Linda had saved him. She refused to let him disappear into the darkness. She held him when he could not speak. She made him eat when he forgot to be hungry. She reminded him that he was still alive, even when he did not want to be. But then she got sick. And this time, there was no one to save him. The club had tried. His brothers showed up when they heard the diagnosis. They brought food. They sat with him in the hospital waiting room. They did not ask him to talk. They just stayed. That was what the club was. Not what the newspapers said. Not what the movies showed. They were men who had been thrown away by the world and had built their own family from the pieces. They protected their own. They showed up when it mattered. After Linda died, the brothers came by every few weeks to check on him. They invited him to rides. They left beer on his porch. But Earl had pulled away. He had stopped answering calls. He had stopped leaving the house except to buy groceries. He had told himself he was done. Done with people. Done with caring. Done with letting anyone close enough to hurt him again. But then he saw those 3 girls on that porch. The oldest one, Cora, looking at him with empty eyes. The youngest one, Penny, with her bare hands turning red in the cold. They were the same ages Sadie would have been. The ages she never got to reach. Earl could not save his daughter. He could not save his wife. But maybe he could do something for them. The night passed slowly. Earl did not sleep. He sat in the garage until the first gray light of dawn crept through the dusty window. Then he stood, stretched his aching back, and walked to the house. The living room was quiet. Marlene and the girls were still asleep on the couch, tangled together under blankets. Earl moved past them toward the kitchen to make coffee. He stopped when he saw the table. A napkin lay in the center, held down by a salt shaker. On it was a drawing done in pencil. 4 stick figures stood in a row. A mother, 3 girls, and a large man with a motorcycle beside him. Above the man, in crooked letters, was a single word: safe. Earl stared at the drawing for a long time. His jaw tightened, his eyes burned. He picked up the napkin carefully, like it was made of glass, and held it in his rough hands. Marlene was awake before the sun rose. She lay still on the couch, listening to her daughters breathe. Penny was curled against her side, one hand still clutching Boo. Ivy had rolled onto the floor during the night, her napkin drawings scattered around her like fallen leaves. Cora slept sitting up, her back against the armrest, her head tilted at an uncomfortable angle. Even in sleep, Cora looked like she was standing guard. Marlene eased herself off the couch and walked to the window. The sky was gray. The snow from Thanksgiving night had frozen into a hard crust on the ground. The streets were empty. Most families were still asleep, full from yesterday's meals, safe in their warm homes. She had to leave. She knew that. This stranger had done more than anyone could ask, but she could not stay here. She could not become another burden. She would find the shelter, fill out the paperwork, get her name on the emergency housing list. She had done it before. She could do it again. The smell of coffee drifted from the kitchen. Marlene turned. Earl stood by the counter, pouring 2 cups. He did not look like he had slept. His eyes were heavy. His shoulders sagged. But his hands were steady as he set a cup on the table and slid it toward her. "Cream is in the fridge," he said. "Sugar is by the stove." Marlene hesitated. Then she walked to the table and sat down. Earl took his cup and leaned against the counter. He did not sit. He did not crowd her. He just stood there, drinking his coffee, waiting. "I need to find the shelter," Marlene said. "The girls and I will be out of your way by noon." Earl nodded slowly. He took another sip. Then he spoke. "Shelters are packed this time of year. Holiday overflow. Families sleeping in hallways. They will not have beds until Tuesday at the earliest." Marlene looked down at her cup. She had not thought about that. "Stay through the weekend," Earl said. "The girls need rest. You need rest. There is no rush." Marlene shook her head. "I cannot keep taking from you. You do not even know us." "I know enough." Earl set his cup on the counter. "I know you are a mother who would stand in the snow all night before letting her children see her give up. I know your oldest girl has not slept properly in weeks. I know the little one still believes in kindness, even after everything she has been through." Marlene's throat tightened. She did not know what to say. A small voice came from the doorway. "Mama?" Marlene turned. Cora stood at the edge of the living room, her arms wrapped around herself, her eyes moving between her mother and Earl. "Are we leaving?" Cora asked. Marlene opened her mouth to answer, but before she could speak, Cora said something else, something quiet, something that stopped Marlene cold. "I feel safe here." Marlene stared at her daughter. Cora had not used that word since Tom died. Not once. Not when Derek offered them the guest rooms. Not when Marlene promised everything would be okay. Not ever. But she used it now. In this stranger's kitchen. On this cold Friday morning. Earl looked at Cora. His face did not change, but something shifted in his eyes. He gave her a small nod. "You are safe," he said. "For as long as you need to be." The weekend passed slowly. Earl kept his distance. He spent most of his time in the garage or on the porch, giving the family space. Marlene helped with small things, washing dishes, folding blankets, trying to feel useful. On Saturday afternoon, Earl made a phone call. He spoke in a low voice, his back to the living room. But Marlene caught pieces of it. A woman named Rosa, a social worker, someone who had helped families connected to the club before. She will come by Monday, Earl said when he hung up. She knows the system. She can help you find something permanent. Marlene nodded. For the first time in days, she felt something like hope. Saturday evening came quietly. The girls were in the living room, playing a card game Earl had found in a closet. Marlene stood by the window, watching the snow glitter under the streetlights. Then she saw the headlights. A truck turned onto the street. It moved fast, too fast for the icy roads. It pulled to a sharp stop in front of Earl's house. The driver's door swung open. A man stepped out. Marlene's blood went cold. Derek. His face was twisted with anger. His breath came out in white clouds as he marched toward the house. Marlene! His voice echoed down the empty street. I know you are in there. You think you can steal from me and just disappear? In the living room, Penny dropped her cards. Cora pulled her sisters close, her eyes wide with fear. Earl was already on his feet, moving toward the door. Earl reached the front door before Derek made it halfway up the walkway. He stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind him. The night air was bitter cold, but Earl did not flinch. He stood with his feet planted wide, his hands loose at his sides, his face empty of expression. Derek stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. His breath came fast and ragged. His face was flushed red despite the freezing temperature. He pointed a finger at the closed door. I know she is in there, Derek said. His voice cracked with anger. You have no idea who you are dealing with. That woman is a liar and a thief. Earl said nothing. He waited. Derek took another step forward. She stole jewelry from my house. My mother's jewelry. Pieces worth thousands of dollars. She has been planning this for months, taking advantage of my kindness. Earl tilted his head slightly. His voice came out low and even. You have proof? Derek hesitated. His mouth opened, then closed. I do not need proof. I know what I know. She was living under my roof, eating my food, and the whole time she was scheming to rob me. So you have no proof. Derek's jaw tightened. Get out of my way. I want to talk to her. I want my property back. Earl did not move. He looked at Derek the way a man looks at a barking dog. Calm, patient, unimpressed. This is my property. You are standing on it without an invitation. That makes you a trespasser. I will call the police, Derek said. Go ahead. Earl's voice did not change. Call them. Tell them your story. Bring them back here with a warrant. Until then, you are leaving. Derek took one more step forward. His fists clenched at his sides. He was a tall man, broad in the shoulders, used to filling a room with his presence. But Earl was bigger, and Earl was not moving. The two men stood in silence. The cold air hung between them like a held breath. Inside the house, Marlene pressed her back against the wall. Penny was crying softly into her shoulder. Ivy sat frozen on the floor, her napkin drawings clutched to her chest. Cora stood at the window, watching through a crack in the curtains. Her face had gone pale. Her hands trembled at her sides. Marlene had seen her daughter scared before. But this was different. This was the kind of fear that ran deeper than the moment. This was old fear, hidden fear. Outside, Derek finally stepped back, his face twisted with frustration. This is not over, he said. You think you can protect her? You do not know what kind of person she is. You do not know what she has done. Earl spoke quietly. I know enough. I know you threw a mother and 3 children into the snow on Thanksgiving night. I know you did not even give them coats. Derek's mouth snapped shut. He had no answer for that. Leave, Earl said. Now. Do not come back unless you bring the police. And even then, you better have something real, or you will be wasting everyone's time. Derek stood frozen for a long moment. His eyes burned with rage. But he did not step forward again. Something in Earl's stillness told him it would be a mistake. He turned and walked back to his truck. The door slammed, the engine roared. The tires spun on the icy street before catching traction. Then he was gone, disappearing around the corner into the darkness. Earl stood on the porch for another minute, watching, making sure Derek did not circle back. Then he turned and went inside. Marlene met him in the hallway. Her face was wet with tears. Her hands shook as she reached for him. I did not steal anything, she said. I swear to you. I never touched his mother's jewelry. I do not even know where he keeps it. Earl nodded once. I never thought you did. Marlene exhaled. Her whole body sagged with relief. Penny had stopped crying. Ivy was still holding her drawings. But Cora had not moved from the window. She stood with her back to the room, her shoulders stiff, her head bowed. Earl noticed. He watched her for a moment. Then he walked to the couch and sat down, giving the room space to breathe. Several minutes passed in silence. Penny fell asleep against her mother's side. Ivy began to draw again, her pencil scratching softly against the paper. Then Cora turned from the window. She walked across the room slowly, her steps hesitant. She stopped in front of Earl. Her eyes stayed fixed on the floor. Can I tell you something? Her voice was barely a whisper. Earl leaned forward slightly. You can tell me anything. Cora was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her words came out broken and small. Derek used to come into my room. At night, when Mama was working late, the room went silent. Marlene's face drained of color. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Cora's voice cracked. He said no one would believe me. He said it was our secret. Earl did not move. His face went still as stone. His hands rested on his knees, motionless. But something changed behind his eyes. Something cold and certain. Marlene pulled Cora into her arms, sobbing. Penny woke and started crying again without knowing why. Ivy dropped her drawings and crawled toward her sisters. Earl sat in silence, watching the family hold each other. His jaw was tight. His breathing was slow and controlled. He did not speak, but his decision had already been made. Earl was already outside before the last tear had dried on Cora's face. He stood on the back porch with his phone pressed to his ear, his breath turning white in the freezing air. The door was closed behind him. He did not want the family to hear what he was about to say. The first call went to Rosa. She answered on the third ring, her voice tired but alert. Earl did not waste time with greetings. I need you here tomorrow. Not Monday. Tomorrow. Rosa paused. She knew Earl well enough to know he did not make requests like this lightly. What happened? A child disclosed. The man who did it is still out there. He came to my house tonight looking for the mother. Rosa's voice changed. It went from tired to sharp. How old is the child? 8? I will be there by 9 in the morning. Do not let them leave the house. Earl hung up and made the second call. This one went to a man named Marcus. Marcus had been a cop for 15 years before he got tired of watching the system fail the people it was supposed to protect. Now he ran a private security company. He worked with the club when things needed to be handled quietly and correctly. Marcus answered on the first ring. Earl, it has been a while. I need help. Earl's voice was flat. There is a man named Derek. He lives on Maple Street, the big house at the corner. He abused a child. He is also harassing the mother, accusing her of theft to cover his tracks. Marcus was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was cold. What do you need? Eyes on him. Document everything. Do not touch him. We are going to do this the right way. Understood. I will have someone on him by midnight. Earl hung up and made the third call. This one went to a lawyer named Davis. Davis had represented the club in legal matters for over 20 years. He knew the system inside and out, and he knew how to make it work for people who usually got crushed by it. Earl, Davis answered with the calm voice of a man who was never surprised by bad news. What is going on? I have a mother and 3 kids staying with me. The brother-in-law threw them out on Thanksgiving. Tonight he showed up here, made accusations about stolen jewelry. An hour ago, the oldest girl told me he abused her. Davis let out a long breath. Has anyone filed a report yet? Not yet. The mother just found out tonight. She is in shock. Get her to file tomorrow morning. First thing, I will come by and walk her through it. Earl nodded, even though Davis could not see him. Thank you. He ended the call and stood in the cold for another minute. His hands were shaking, but not from the temperature. The anger inside him was old and familiar. It was the same anger he had felt 30 years ago, sitting in a hospital room holding his daughter's hand for the last time. He could not save Sadie. He could not save Linda. But he could do something now. He could protect this family. Earl went back inside. The living room was quiet. Penny had fallen asleep again, exhausted from crying. Ivy sat beside her, one hand resting on her sister's back. Cora was curled up next to her mother, her face hidden against Marlene's shoulder. Marlene looked up when Earl entered. Her eyes were red and swollen. Her face was pale. I did not know, she said. Her voice broke on the words. I swear I did not know. Earl sat down in the chair across from her. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands folded together. I believe you, he said. And none of this is your fault. Marlene shook her head. I should have seen it. I should have known something was wrong. She stopped sleeping. She stopped eating. I thought it was grief. I thought she was just missing her father. He hid it from you. That is what they do. Marlene closed her eyes. Tears ran down her cheeks. What am I supposed to do now? Earl's voice was steady. You are not going to face this alone. I called some people. A social worker, a lawyer, a man who can keep watch on Derek. They are coming. Marlene looked at him. Why are you doing all of this? You do not know us. Earl was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke. I know what it feels like to lose someone you love. I know what it feels like to wish you had done something different. I cannot change what happened to my family, but I can help yours. Marlene did not respond. She just held Cora tighter. That night, 3 motorcycles rumbled into Earl's driveway. The engines cut off one by one. 3 men walked up the path and knocked on the door. Marcus came first. He was tall and broad, with gray at his temples and a calm face that had seen everything. Davis followed, carrying a leather briefcase, his eyes already scanning the room. The third man was named Theo. He was younger, softer, with kind eyes and a voice made for talking to frightened children. Earl let them in. Marlene stood by the couch, her daughters behind her, watching these strangers fill the room. Marcus looked at her and gave a small nod. We are here to help. For the first time since Thanksgiving night, Marlene felt something shift inside her chest. She was not alone anymore. Rosa arrived at 8 in the morning, an hour earlier than she had promised. She carried a folder thick with paperwork and a bag filled with snacks for the children. Her face was calm, but her eyes moved quickly, taking in the room, the family, the 3 bikers who had stayed through the night. Marlene sat at the kitchen table with dark circles under her eyes. She had not slept. Cora had stayed pressed against her side until dawn, finally falling into an exhausted rest. Ivy and Penny were in the living room, watching cartoons on Earl's old television. The volume was low. The house felt heavy with waiting. Rosa sat down across from Marlene. She opened her folder and spread out a series of forms. I know this feels overwhelming, Rosa said. So we are going to take it one step at a time. Today, we file the report. Tomorrow, we start building the case for emergency housing and a protection order. Marlene stared at the papers. Her hands trembled. What if they do not believe her? Rosa reached across the table and placed her hand over Marlene's. I have been doing this work for 18 years. I have seen children lie about many things, but never about this. Cora is telling the truth, and we are going to make sure the right people hear it. In the living room, Davis was on the phone. His voice was low and professional. He paced near the window, writing notes on a yellow legal pad. Every few minutes, he would pause, listen, and nod before speaking again. Earl leaned against the kitchen doorway, a cup of coffee in his hand. He did not sit with the others. He did not join the conversations. He simply watched, making sure everything was moving forward. Marcus had set up a laptop on the coffee table. His fingers moved across the keyboard with the speed of someone who had spent years tracking people who did not want to be found. He pulled records, cross-referenced names, and built a picture of Derek that went back over a decade. There is a pattern here, Marcus said without looking up. Complaints from 3 different neighbors over the past 5 years. A restraining order filed by an ex-girlfriend in 2019. She dropped it before it went through, but the paperwork is still in the system. Davis looked over from his phone call. Anything that stuck? A DUI charge from 2021. He got probation and fines. Looks like he missed some payments. There is also a dismissed charge from 2018. Marcus paused, contributing to the delinquency of a minor. The file was sealed, but the index is still visible. Earl's jaw tightened. He said nothing, but his grip on the coffee cup grew harder. In the corner of the living room, Theo sat on the floor with Cora. He had brought a sketch pad and a box of colored pencils. He did not ask her questions. He did not push her to talk. He simply drew beside her, making rough shapes on his own paper, letting silence fill the space between them. Cora watched him for a long time. Then she picked up a blue pencil and started to draw. You do not have to tell me anything, Theo said quietly. But if you ever want to, I will listen. Cora did not respond at first. She focused on her paper, adding lines and curves that slowly took shape. A house, a tree, a figure standing alone in the corner. After several minutes, she spoke without looking up. He said I was special. He said that was why he picked me. Theo kept drawing. His hand did not stop. His face did not change. That must have been confusing. Cora nodded. A tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly and kept drawing. Theo did not reach for her. He did not offer comfort she had not asked for. He just stayed beside her, present and patient, letting her set the pace. The hours passed slowly. Rosa finished the paperwork with Marlene. Davis made more phone calls. Marcus compiled his findings into a file that would go to the detective assigned to the case. Earl kept the coffee pot full. He made sandwiches for the children. He cleaned up after everyone without being asked. He was not comfortable with any of this, but he could not leave. These people had come because he called. This family was under his roof. He would see it through. On Sunday afternoon, the phone rang. Marcus answered. He listened for less than a minute, then hung up. Derek was just arrested at his home, Marcus said. Outstanding fines and a parole violation from the DUI. He will be held at least until Monday morning. Marlene closed her eyes. Relief washed over her face, but it was followed quickly by something else. Fear. That is not enough, she said. He will get out. He always gets out. Earl walked to the table and sat down across from her. His voice was low and steady. He will get out. And when he does, we will be ready. This is not over. But you are not alone anymore. Marlene looked at him. For the first time, she did not look away. Outside, the sun was setting. The house was quiet, and somewhere across town, Derek sat in a holding cell, already planning his next move. Derek walked out of the county jail on Monday afternoon. He had a smirk on his face and a phone in his hand before he even reached the parking lot. By Monday night, the posts had started. Marlene did not see them at first. Her phone had been dead for days. She had been focused on her daughters, on the paperwork, on trying to understand what came next. But the rest of the town saw everything. Derek wrote that Marlene had abandoned his brother's memory. He claimed she had stolen from the family and run off to live with a biker gang. He called her unstable. He called her a danger to her own children. He posted photos from happier times, twisting them into evidence of her supposed betrayal. The comments piled up underneath. Some people defended Marlene. Others believed every word Derek wrote. Strangers who had never met her offered opinions about what kind of mother she was. People who had smiled at her in the grocery store now whispered behind her back. At the diner where Marlene worked, the phone rang constantly. Her manager, a woman named Helen, answered the same questions over and over. Is it true? Did she really steal from her dead husband's family? Is she safe to be around? Helen did not believe the rumors. She had known Marlene for 3 years. She had seen her work double shifts without complaint. She had watched her count every tip to make sure her girls had enough for school supplies. But Helen could not stop the whispers. She could only wait for them to pass. Some of Marlene's coworkers reached out quietly. They sent text messages offering help. They dropped off casseroles at Earl's house without leaving their names. They did not want to be seen taking sides. But they wanted Marlene to know she was not alone. Others kept their distance. They had children of their own. They did not want trouble. They told themselves they were staying neutral. But their silence spoke louder than any words. Earl shielded the family from most of it. He kept the television off. He discouraged Marlene from going online. He told her the only thing that mattered was the legal case, and everything else was noise. But on Tuesday afternoon, Marlene finally charged her phone. She sat in the kitchen while the girls napped in the living room. She opened the screen and saw the notifications. 147 messages. Dozens of missed calls. Her name trending in local Facebook groups. She started reading. Her face went pale. Her hands began to shake. Earl found her 20 minutes later, still staring at the screen, tears running down her cheeks. He is telling everyone I'm crazy, she whispered. He is telling them I made it all up. People believe him. Earl took the phone gently from her hands. He set it face down on the table. People believe what is easy, he said. The truth is harder, but the truth wins in the end. Marlene shook her head. What if it does not? What if he gets away with everything? Earl sat down across from her. His voice was steady. Davis says the legal case is strong. Rosa says Child Protective Services is taking this seriously. Marcus has documentation that shows Derek's pattern. The system is slow, but it is moving. Marlene looked at him. Her eyes were red and hollow. And what do I do while I wait? You stay alive, Earl said. You take care of your girls. You let us handle the rest. In the living room, Ivy and Penny were waking up from their nap. Penny wandered into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes. She climbed onto Marlene's lap without a word. Mama, when can we go back to school? Ivy asked from the doorway. Marlene swallowed hard. She did not have an answer. Soon, baby, she said. Soon. The days crawled by. Ivy and Penny began to treat Earl's house like a temporary home. They explored the closets. They played in the backyard. They asked about Christmas decorations and whether Santa would know where to find them. They did not understand what was happening. They did not know why they could not go home. They only knew that Mama was sad, and the big man with the motorcycle let them eat cereal for dinner sometimes. On Wednesday evening, a car pulled up outside Earl's house. A man in a suit stepped out, walked to the mailbox, and slipped an envelope inside. He did not knock. He did not ring the bell. He simply got back in his car and drove away. Earl retrieved the envelope. He opened it standing on the porch. Inside was a letter from Derek's lawyer. It threatened to sue Marlene for defamation if she repeated her accusations to anyone else. It demanded she retract her statements publicly. The letter was addressed to Earl's house. Derek knew exactly where they were staying. Earl folded the letter carefully. He walked back inside. His face revealed nothing, but his hands were steady in a way that meant he was controlling something much larger underneath. The waiting game had just become more dangerous. Marlene packed the suitcase before dawn. Her hands moved fast, shoving clothes into the bag without folding them. She did not know where she would go. She only knew she could not stay. Derek had found them. He knew the address. He was coming for her, one way or another. Earl found her in the hallway, the suitcase in her hand. Her daughter's still asleep on the couch. Where are you going? His voice was quiet, not angry, just steady. Marlene did not look at him. Somewhere he cannot find us. Another state. Another name if I have to. Earl stepped closer. He did not touch her. He did not block her path. He simply stood there, solid and calm. If you run, you look guilty. The court sees a mother who fled. Derek gets to tell whatever story he wants, and you will not be there to fight back. Marlene's grip tightened on the suitcase handle. He knows where we are. He sent that letter to your house. What happens when he decides a letter is not enough? Then he will find out what happens when you threaten a family under my roof. Marlene finally looked at him. Her eyes were red from sleepless nights. Her face was pale and drawn, but something in Earl's voice made her pause. You cannot protect us forever, she said. I am not trying to protect you forever. I am trying to get you through the next 2 weeks. After that, the law will protect you. Marlene stood frozen in the hallway. The suitcase hung heavy in her hand. Behind her, Penny stirred on the couch, mumbling something in her sleep. Slowly, Marlene set the suitcase down. Earl nodded once. He walked past her toward the kitchen. Coffee is ready. We have work to do. By noon, the driveway was full of motorcycles. Marcus had made calls the night before. Brothers came from 3 different towns. They did not come to fight. They came to be seen. They sat on Earl's porch. They worked on their bikes in the driveway. They waved at passing cars and nodded at curious neighbors. Their presence was calm and deliberate. No threats, no aggression, just men who refused to leave. The neighbors noticed. They had avoided Earl for years. They had crossed the street when he walked by. They had whispered about the patches on his jacket and the rumble of his motorcycle. But now they saw something different. An older woman named Dorothy lived 3 houses down. She had not spoken to Earl in the 5 years he had lived on the street. That afternoon, she walked up the driveway carrying a casserole dish covered in foil. Earl met her at the edge of the property. He did not smile, but his face softened. Heard there were children staying with you, Dorothy said. She held out the dish. Thought they might like something homemade. Earl took the casserole. Thank you. Dorothy hesitated. She looked at the motorcycles, at the men on the porch, at the quiet house behind them. Is everything okay? She asked. Earl considered the question. He did not owe this woman an explanation, but something in her eyes told him she was not asking out of gossip. She was asking because she cared. A family needed help, he said. We are making sure they get it. Dorothy nodded slowly. She did not ask for details. She simply patted Earl's arm and walked back toward her house. Over the next 2 days, others followed. A young mother from down the block offered to watch the children if Marlene needed to go to court. A retired teacher brought coloring books and crayons for the girls. A man who worked at the hardware store dropped off extra locks for the doors. None of them asked questions. None of them demanded explanations. They simply showed up, one by one, refusing to let this family stand alone. Inside the house, Marlene watched through the window. She had spent her whole life believing she had to handle everything herself. She had never asked for help. She had never expected anyone to offer it. Now strangers were lining up to protect her children. Cora stood beside her, watching the motorcycles in the driveway. "Mama," she said quietly, "are those men dangerous?" Marlene thought about the question. She thought about Earl sitting with them through the darkest night of their lives. She thought about Marcus and Davis and Theo, working for days without asking for anything in return. "No, baby," she said. "They are the opposite." That evening, Rosa called. Her voice was urgent but hopeful. A judge agreed to hear the emergency protection order request. If it goes through, Derek will be legally barred from contacting you or the girls. Marlene gripped the phone. "When?" "Thursday morning, 9 o'clock. 2 days. 48 hours, until everything could change." Marlene hung up the phone. Her hands were shaking. But for the first time in weeks, they were shaking with hope instead of fear. Outside, the motorcycles sat silent in the fading light. The brothers stayed on the porch, watching the street, keeping guard. Thursday was coming, and they would all be ready. Marlene's hands would not stop shaking. She sat at the front of the courtroom, her back straight, her eyes fixed on the judge's bench. Rosa sat on one side of her. Davis sat on the other. Earl was in the row directly behind, close enough that she could hear him breathe. Across the aisle, Derek sat with his lawyer. He wore a suit that looked new. His hair was combed. His face was calm. He looked like a man with nothing to hide. But his eyes told a different story. Every few seconds, he glanced at Marlene. Each glance was a reminder, a warning, a promise that this was far from over. The judge entered through a side door. She was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She sat down, reviewed the papers in front of her, and called the hearing to order. Davis stood first. He spoke in a measured voice, laying out the facts one by one. He described the pattern of complaints against Derek spanning 5 years. He presented statements from neighbors who had witnessed his aggressive behavior. He referenced the restraining order filed by Derek's ex-girlfriend, the one she had dropped before it went through. Then he spoke about Cora. He did not share explicit details. He did not need to. He explained that a trained child counselor had conducted multiple sessions with the 8-year-old. He presented the documented statements Cora had made, recorded with her mother's consent and reviewed by Rosa. The words hung heavy in the courtroom. Marlene felt her chest tighten. She could not look at Derek. She could not look at anyone. Derek's lawyer stood next. He was a tall man with a smooth voice and an easy smile. He called Marlene unstable. He pointed to her living situation with a known motorcycle gang member. He suggested she had fabricated the accusations to gain sympathy and deflect from her own failings as a mother. He spoke about Earl as if he were a criminal. He painted the club as dangerous. He implied that Marlene had fallen under the influence of people who wanted to destroy Derek for reasons of their own. The judge listened without expression. Her pen moved across her notepad. Her eyes stayed fixed on whoever was speaking. When Derek's lawyer finished, the judge turned to Marlene. "Do you have anything you would like to say?" Marlene looked at Davis. He gave her a small nod. She stood slowly, her legs unsteady beneath her. "Your Honor." Her voice was quiet at first. She cleared her throat and tried again. "I am not here because I want revenge. I am not here because I want money. I am here because I want my daughters to be safe." She paused. Her hands gripped the edge of the table. "For 6 months, I tried to make things work. I took extra shifts. I kept my children quiet. I made myself as small as I could so we would not be a burden. And still, he threw us out on Thanksgiving night. Still, he came to find us. Still, he threatened us." Marlene looked at the judge. Her eyes were wet, but her voice stayed steady. "My oldest daughter told me something no mother should ever have to hear. She told me because she finally felt safe enough to speak. I am asking you to help me keep her safe." She sat down. The courtroom was silent. The judge reviewed her notes for what felt like an eternity. Then she looked up. "I have reviewed the evidence presented today. I have considered the statements from both parties. I find sufficient cause to believe that the petitioner and her minor children are at risk of harm." She turned to Derek. "The court hereby grants an emergency protection order. The respondent is forbidden from contacting the petitioner or her children directly or indirectly. The respondent must maintain a distance of at least 500 feet from any residence occupied by the petitioner. Derek's face went red. His lawyer placed a hand on his arm, but Derek shook it off. The judge continued. Violation of this order will result in immediate arrest. This order is effective immediately and will remain in place pending further proceedings. She struck her gavel once. The sound echoed through the room. Davis helped Marlene to her feet. Rosa squeezed her hand. Earl stood behind them, his presence solid and silent. They walked out of the courtroom together. The hallway was long and bright. Marlene's heart pounded in her chest. She had won. The order was in place. Her daughters were protected by law. Then she saw Derek. He stood near the exit, his lawyer speaking quietly in his ear. When he saw Marlene, he stopped. His eyes locked onto hers. He did not say a word. He did not need to. His stare said everything. This was not over. Not for him. Earl stepped forward. He positioned himself between Marlene and Derek, blocking the line of sight. His back was to Marlene. His face was toward Derek. Derek's jaw tightened. His fists clenched at his sides. But he did not move. He did not speak. After a long moment, he turned and walked away, disappearing through the courthouse doors. Marlene exhaled. Her whole body trembled. Earl turned back to her. His voice was low. Let us go home. The apartment was small. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that opened into a living room barely big enough for a couch. The carpet was worn in places, and the paint on the walls had faded to a color that was almost white but not quite. But it was theirs. Marlene stood in the doorway, the key still in her hand. Behind her, Ivy pushed past, with an armful of napkin drawings she had collected over the past 2 weeks. Penny followed, clutching Boo tight against her chest, her eyes wide as she explored the new space. Cora came last. She walked slowly, her gaze moving from room to room, checking corners, testing windows. Even now, she could not stop watching for danger. But when she saw the small bedroom she would share with her sisters, something in her shoulders relaxed. Just a little. Rosa had found the apartment through a program for families in crisis. The complex was in a quiet neighborhood, surrounded by other units filled with young mothers and children. There was a playground in the courtyard. There were streetlights that worked. There was a lock on the door that only Marlene had the key to. For the first time in months, they had a home. Earl arrived an hour later with his truck loaded down. He had gathered what little they owned from his house, and he had added things they needed. A small table for the kitchen. Chairs that did not match but were sturdy. A bookshelf Ivy could use for her drawings. He carried boxes up the stairs without complaint. He assembled the table with tools he had brought from his garage. He hung a curtain rod in the bedroom so the girls would have privacy. Marlene tried to help, but Earl waved her off. Rest, he said. You have been running for weeks. The boxes can wait. She sat on the floor of the living room and watched him work. Penny had found a spot by the window where afternoon light poured in. She pressed her face to the glass, watching birds hop across the courtyard below. Mama, look, Penny said. That one has a red head. Marlene smiled. It was a small moment, ordinary and quiet, but it felt like the first breath after nearly drowning. The next week brought more changes. Cora started at a new school. She did not make friends right away, but she came home without the hollow look she had carried for so long. Ivy decorated every blank wall with drawings, turning the plain apartment into a gallery of stick figures and crooked houses and flowers in impossible colors. Marlene found a job at a grocery store 2 blocks away. The hours were better than the diner. The manager did not ask questions about her past. She started attending a support group for single mothers on Tuesday nights while a neighbor watched the girls. She called her old co-workers from the diner. Helen answered on the first ring. Marlene. Helen's voice was warm. I have been hoping you would call. I did not know if you would want to hear from me, Marlene said. After everything Derek posted, Helen was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke. I have known you for 3 years. I have seen you work doubles without complaining. I have watched you count tips to make sure your girls had what they needed. I never believed a word that man said. Marlene closed her eyes. Tears ran down her cheeks. Thank you. You do not have to thank me for telling the truth. On the day they finished unpacking, Earl stood in the doorway of the apartment. The work was done. The boxes were empty. The furniture was in place. He did not know how to say goodbye. He had never been good with words. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his hands hanging at his sides. Marlene walked over to him. You are welcome here any time. This would not exist without you. Earl nodded once. He looked at the floor. You would have found a way. You are stronger than you think. Before he could say anything else, Cora appeared beside him. She did not speak. She just wrapped her arms around his waist and held on tight. The hug lasted only a few seconds, fierce and wordless. Then she let go and walked back to her sisters. Earl blinked. He cleared his throat. He nodded again and walked out the door. Penny waved from the window as his truck pulled away. That night, Earl sat alone in his quiet house. The silence felt heavier than it had before. He made coffee. He sat at the kitchen table. He stared at nothing. Then he noticed the paper. A drawing lay in the center of the table. He had not seen it before. Someone must have slipped it there when he was not looking. Earl picked it up carefully. 4 figures stood in a row. A mother, 3 daughters, and a large man with a motorcycle beside him. But this time, the man was not standing outside. He was standing inside a house, surrounded by the others. Above the house, in Ivy's crooked handwriting, was a single word: family. Earl stared at the drawing for a long time. His jaw tightened, his eyes burned. He did not put it in a box. He did not hide it away. He walked to the refrigerator, found an old magnet, and hung the drawing where he could see it every day. Cora sat in a small room with soft chairs and walls painted pale yellow. Across from her, Theo waited with his sketchpad resting on his knee. He did not rush her. He never did. He simply sat there, quiet and patient, letting her decide when to speak. 3 months had passed since Thanksgiving night. Winter had faded. The snow was gone. Outside the window, the first signs of spring were pushing through the soil. Cora picked up a colored pencil. She drew a line across the paper, then another. She did not look at Theo when she spoke. I had a dream last night, she said. About my dad. Theo nodded. His voice was gentle. What happened in the dream? He was sitting on a porch, just sitting there, watching the sky. I walked up to him and he smiled at me. He did not say anything. He just smiled. Cora stopped drawing. Her hand rested on the paper. I woke up and I was not scared. She looked at Theo. That has not happened in a long time. Theo smiled softly. That sounds like progress. Cora shrugged. She went back to her drawing. But something had shifted in her face. The tightness that had lived there for months was beginning to ease. Recovery was not fast. It was not dramatic. There were still hard nights. There were still moments when Cora froze at the sound of footsteps, or flinched when a door opened too quickly. But those moments were becoming less frequent. The spaces between them were growing longer. She slept through the night more often now. She laughed at things her sisters said. She had made a friend at school, a quiet girl named Maria who liked to draw almost as much as Ivy did. Cora was learning to trust again. Not everyone, not completely, but enough to believe that some adults would keep their promises. Marlene was changing too. She had enrolled in a parenting class at the community center. No one had ordered her to go. No judge had demanded it. She went because she wanted to understand what she had missed. The class met on Wednesday nights. A counselor led discussions about warning signs, about listening without interrupting, about creating space for children to tell the truth even when the truth was hard. Marlene sat in the back row at first, afraid of being judged, but the other parents in the room had their own stories. They had their own guilt. They had their own questions about what they could have done differently. By the 3rd week, Marlene was sitting in the front row. By the 6th week, she was raising her hand to share. I thought I was protecting them by working so hard, she said one night. I thought if I could just keep a roof over their heads, everything else would be okay. The counselor nodded. And now? Marlene looked at her hands. Now I know that being there is more important than being busy. Listening is more important than fixing. She carried those lessons home. She sat with Cora at night and asked how she was feeling. She let Ivy show her every drawing without rushing to the next thing. She held Penny and told her that she was safe, that she would always be safe. Earl stayed in their lives, but he kept a respectful distance. He did not move into the apartment. He did not try to replace what they had lost. He simply showed up when he was needed. He came to Penny's 5th birthday party. He brought a cake from the bakery down the street and a small stuffed bear to keep Boo company. He sat on the floor and let Penny put a paper crown on his head without complaint. He taught Ivy how to change a tire in the parking lot behind the apartment complex. She was only 6, too young to do it herself, but she watched every step with wide eyes. When he finished, she declared that she would be a mechanic when she grew up. He sat on the apartment steps with Penny on warm evenings and told her stories about motorcycles. where they went, what they saw, how the road stretched out forever if you let it. These were small moments, quiet moments, but they added up to something larger. One evening, after the girls were in bed, Marlene sat on the steps beside Earl. The sky was dark. The air was cool but not cold. "Can I ask you something?" Marlene said. Earl nodded. "Why did you help us?" "That night, on the porch. You did not know us. You had no reason to care." Earl was quiet for a long time. He stared at the street, at the shadows between the streetlights. "I had a daughter," he said finally. "Her name was Sadie." Marlene waited. She did not interrupt. "She was 7 when she died. A car accident. A drunk driver ran a red light." Earl's voice was steady, but his hands gripped his knees. "I could not save her. I tried to save myself by shutting everything out. But before Linda died, she made me promise something." "What did she make you promise?" Earl turned to look at Marlene. His eyes were heavy with years of carrying something he could never put down. "She made me promise I would never stop protecting children, even if I could not protect my own." Marlene felt tears slide down her cheeks. She did not wipe them away. They sat together in the quiet, two people who had lost everything and somehow found a reason to keep going. Marcus stood at the front of Earl's living room. A map spread across the coffee table. Red pins marked locations across 3 counties where the club had responded to calls over the past year. Shelters that needed escorts, courthouses where survivors needed someone to walk beside them, neighborhoods where a visible presence kept trouble at bay. Marlene sat on the couch, watching as Marcus explained what outsiders never saw. "People look at us and see the leather," Marcus said. "They see the patches, they assume the worst." He tapped one of the red pins on the map. "But this pin is a woman we helped get to a custody hearing when her ex said he would kill her if she showed up. She showed up. We made sure of it." He tapped another pin. "This one is a kid who was being bullied so bad he stopped going to school. We rode with him on his first day back. No one touched him after that." Marlene looked at Earl. He sat in the corner, quiet as always, his arms crossed over his chest. "Why do you do it?" she asked. "You do not owe anyone anything." Marcus shrugged. "Because someone has to. And because we can." Earl finally spoke. His voice was low and steady. "I want to do something more. Something that stops things before they start." The room went quiet. Marcus turned to look at him. Earl leaned forward. "Rosa works with schools. She teaches kids about safety, about warning signs. But the programs are small. They do not have enough people, enough reach." He paused. "What if we partnered with her? What if we went into schools and taught kids what to watch for? How to signal when something is wrong? How to tell an adult without being afraid?" Marcus considered this. The other brothers in the room exchanged glances. "You want us in schools?" Marcus said. "Officially." Earl nodded. "Not as enforcers, as volunteers, as examples that protection does not always look the way people expect." The silence stretched for a long moment. Then Marcus smiled. "I think Linda would have liked that idea." Earl's jaw tightened. He did not respond, but his eyes said everything. The vote was unanimous. The club would support the initiative. They would provide volunteers, visibility, and the kind of presence that made people pay attention. Rosa agreed to lead the curriculum. She had been doing this work for years, but never with this kind of backing. The first workshop was scheduled for a Saturday morning. It would be held at Cora's school, in the gymnasium where students gathered for assemblies. Parents would be invited, teachers would attend, and for the first time in the district's history, a Hells Angels chapter would be welcomed inside, not as a threat but as allies. Marlene agreed to speak. She would share her story, the part she could share, and talk about what she wished she had known sooner. Earl would stand in the back. He did not need to be seen. He just needed to be there. The night before the workshop, Marlene called him. "Are you nervous?" she asked. Earl was quiet for a moment. Then he answered, "I spent 30 years being feared. Tomorrow I get to be trusted. That is not something to be nervous about. That is something to be grateful for." Marlene smiled into the phone. She did not have words for what she felt, but she did not need them. The sun would rise in a few hours, and when it did, something new would begin. The gymnasium buzzed with voices. Folding chairs filled the basketball court in neat rows, and nearly every seat was taken. Parents sat with children on their laps. Teachers stood along the walls with clipboards in hand. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, casting long rectangles of light across the polished floor. Near the back doors, 6 men in leather jackets stood quietly. Their patches were visible, Their arms were crossed. A few parents glanced at them and looked away quickly. Others whispered to each other, unsure what to make of the scene. Rosa stood at the front of the room behind a small podium. She adjusted the microphone and waited for the crowd to settle. When the noise faded, she began. "Thank you all for coming," she said. "Today we are going to talk about something important. We are going to talk about keeping children safe." She clicked a button, and a slide appeared on the screen behind her. It showed a simple hand signal, a child's fingers crossed behind their back. "This is a safety signal," Rosa explained. "If a child uses this gesture, it means they need help but cannot say so out loud. Teachers, parents, coaches, anyone can learn to recognize it." The room was silent. Parents leaned forward in their seats. Children watched with wide eyes. Rosa continued through the presentation. She explained other signals, other words, other ways children could reach out when they felt afraid. She talked about trusted adults, about how to identify them, about what to do when something felt wrong. Then she turned to Marlene. "I want to introduce someone who knows firsthand how important it is to ask for help," Rosa said, "even when it feels impossible." Marlene walked to the podium. Her hands trembled, but her voice was steady. "6 months ago, my daughters and I had nowhere to go," she said. "We were alone, afraid, and out of options. A stranger saw us standing in the cold, and he chose to help." She paused. Her eyes found Earl near the back door. "I spent my whole life believing I had to handle everything myself. I thought asking for help meant I had failed, but I was wrong." Marlene looked at the parents in the audience. "Asking for help is not weakness, it is courage. And sometimes the people who help you are not the ones you expected." She stepped back from the podium. Cora stood beside her, silent but present. She did not speak. She did not need to. Her presence said everything. Ivy moved through the rows of chairs, handing out drawings she had made for the event. Each one showed families, protectors, hands reaching toward each other. The children who received them smiled and held them carefully. The bikers remained at the edges of the room. They did not speak. They did not move to the front, but their presence was impossible to ignore. When the presentation ended, the audience rose to their feet. The applause started slowly and grew until it filled the gymnasium. It was not applause for the bikers alone. It was applause for the idea that protection belonged to everyone. As the crowd began to disperse, a man in a flannel shirt approached Earl, near the back door. He was tall, with gray in his beard and tired eyes. "I have to be honest with you," the man said. "I used to cross the street when I saw you coming." Earl nodded. He did not seem surprised. The man extended his hand. "I was wrong. I wanted to shake your hand and say thank you for what you did." Earl took his hand and shook it once. He did not smile, but something softened in his face. "Take care of your family," Earl said. "That is all any of us can do." The man nodded and walked away. Near the gymnasium door, Marlene was packing up the last of Ivy's drawings when a young woman approached her. She was in her late 20s, with red-rimmed eyes and hands that would not stop moving. "Excuse me," the woman said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Are you the one who spoke today?" Marlene nodded. The woman looked around, making sure no one was listening. Then she leaned closer. "My sister is in trouble," she said. "Her husband, he is not a good man. She is afraid to leave. She does not know who to trust." Tears spilled down the woman's cheeks. "I heard what you said up there, about asking for help, about unexpected people being heroes." She grabbed Marlene's hand. "Can you talk to her? Please. I do not know what else to do." Marlene looked at the woman's face. She saw the same fear she had carried 6 months ago, the same desperation, the same hope that someone, anyone, would listen. She squeezed the woman's hand. "Yes," Marlene said. "I will talk to her." The phone calls started the Monday after the workshop. Rosa's office received 12 messages before noon. Parents who had attended the session wanted to know more. Teachers asked for copies of the materials. 2 other schools requested their own workshops. The young mother's sister, a woman named Grace, met with Rosa that Wednesday. She arrived with a bruise on her arm that she tried to hide with a long sleeve. By Thursday, she was in a shelter. By the following week, she had filed for a protective order. 1 family became 2. 2 became 5. The ripples spread outward in ways no one could have predicted. A local news station picked up the story. The reporter was a woman in her 40s who had covered crime for 20 years. She did not sensationalize what had happened. She did not use words like gang or outlaw. She simply told the truth about a community coming together to protect its children. The segment aired on a Thursday evening. By Friday morning, it had been shared thousands of times online. Derek's case moved slowly through the courts. The legal process was complicated, filled with hearings and motions and delays. But the evidence Rosa and Marcus had gathered proved impossible to ignore. Witnesses came forward. Patterns emerged. The full charges were not made public, but the community learned enough. The man who had called Marlene a liar now faced questions of his own. Those who had believed his social media posts began to reconsider. Some reached out to Marlene privately to apologize. Others stayed silent, too ashamed to admit they had been wrong. Public opinion shifted like a tide changing direction. It did not happen all at once. But day by day, the whispers grew quieter. The stares became less hostile. The truth had a way of finding its way to the surface. The Hells Angels received mixed reactions. Some people would never trust them. They saw the leather and the patches, and made up their minds before a single word was spoken. Earl understood this. He had lived with it for decades, but others began to see something different. A coffee shop owner named Patricia had watched Earl ride past her window for 5 years without ever waving. The week after the workshop, she stepped outside when she saw him park his motorcycle. She handed him a cup of coffee and told him it was on the house, whenever he wanted, for as long as she owned the shop. Earl did not know what to say. He took the cup and nodded once. Patricia smiled. "You probably saved those girls' lives. Least I can do is make you some coffee." It was a small thing. But small things added up. Marlene and her daughters settled into the rhythm of their new life. Cora went to school every morning and came home with stories about her friend Maria. Ivy filled notebook after notebook with drawings, each one brighter than the last. Penny learned to write her name and showed everyone who would look. They ate dinner together at the small kitchen table. They read stories before bed. They laughed at silly jokes and cried at sad movies and argued about whose turn it was to pick what to watch on the old television Earl had given them. Normal things. Simple things. The kind of things Marlene had dreamed about during the darkest nights in Derek's house. On a quiet Sunday morning, Earl sat on his porch with a cup of coffee. The mailman had come early, leaving a small stack of letters in the box at the end of the driveway. Earl retrieved them without much interest. Bills, mostly. Advertisements for things he would never buy. But one envelope was different. It was small and white, addressed in handwriting that was careful but uneven. The return address was from a town 200 miles away, a town Earl had never visited. He opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper. The letter was written in pencil, the lines slightly crooked. The letters formed with the effort of someone still learning to write. Earl read the words slowly. "Dear Mr. Earl, my teacher showed us a video about the workshop you did. I watched it 3 times. I have a secret I have been scared to tell anyone, but now I know I can tell someone. Thank you for being brave. From Sophie, age 9. Earl stared at the letter for a long time. The coffee in his hand grew cold. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky. He thought about Sadie. He thought about the promise he had made to Linda. He thought about Cora and Ivy and Penny, safe in their apartment across town. And now, somewhere 200 miles away, a 9-year-old girl named Sophie was finding the courage to speak. Earl folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Close to his heart, the ripples were still spreading. Earl stood at the edge of the cemetery, his boots sinking slightly into the soft spring grass. The headstone in front of him was simple gray granite with 2 names carved into its surface. Linda's name was on the left. Sadie's was on the right. He visited every Sunday, but he rarely spoke out loud. Today was different. "I met some people," he said quietly. "A mother and 3 girls. They were in trouble. I helped them." The wind moved through the trees. A bird called somewhere in the distance. The oldest one reminds me of her. Same serious eyes. Same way of watching everything. Earl paused. He looked at Sadie's name, tracing the letters with his gaze. She would be 37 now. Maybe she would have kids of her own. Maybe she would have brought them here to meet you. He did not cry. He had used up his tears years ago. But something shifted in his chest. A tightness that had lived there for decades, loosened just a little. "I think you would be proud," he said. "Both of you." He stood in silence for another moment. Then he turned and walked back to his truck. The brothers noticed the change before Earl did. At the next club gathering, he stayed longer than usual. He sat at the main table instead of the corner. He laughed at a joke Marcus told, a real laugh that surprised everyone, including himself. He stopped retreating to his garage every night. Some evenings he sat on the porch and waved at neighbors who passed. Some evenings he called Marlene just to check in. Some evenings he did nothing at all. And that was enough. The younger members of the club started seeking him out. They came to him with questions about their bikes, about their lives, about decisions they did not know how to make. Earl did not give lectures. He did not pretend to have all the answers. He simply listened, and when he spoke, his words carried weight. "The patches do not make you strong," he told a young rider named Cole one afternoon. "Anyone can wear leather. What matters is what you do when no one is watching, how you treat people who cannot fight back." Cole nodded slowly. He was 23, still learning what it meant to be part of something bigger than himself. "The old guys used to talk about the code," Cole said. "Protect the innocent. Stand for those who cannot stand alone." Earl set down his wrench and looked at the young man. "That is not just talk. That is why we exist. Everything else is just noise." Cole remembered those words. He carried them with him, long after that afternoon ended. One evening, Earl sat on Marlene's apartment steps while the girls played in the courtyard. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Penny ran over, her face flushed from chasing Ivy around the playground. "Earl," she said, slightly out of breath. "I have a question." He looked down at her. "What is it?" "My school is doing a play next month. I'm going to be a flower." She twisted her hands together. "Will you come?" Earl went still. He had not been inside a school since Sadie was alive. The thought of sitting in one of those small auditorium seats, surrounded by children and parents, made something cold settle in his stomach. Penny watched his face. Her smile faded just a little. "You do not have to," she said quickly. "I know you are busy." Earl looked at this little girl, who had spent Thanksgiving night freezing on a stranger's porch. He looked at her hopeful eyes, the same eyes that had been filled with tears 6 months ago. Penny reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were small and warm. "Please," she said softly. "I want you to see me be a flower." Earl felt the cold thing in his stomach begin to melt. He thought about Linda's grave, about the promise he had made, about all the years he had spent hiding from the world. He squeezed Penny's hand gently. "Yes," he said. "I will be there." Penny's face lit up. She threw her arms around his neck in a quick hug, then ran back to the playground to tell her sisters. Earl watched her go. His throat was tight, his eyes burned. But for the first time in 30 years, the thought of walking into a school did not feel like walking into a memory. It felt like walking into a future. The apartment glowed with warmth. Candles flickered on the windowsills. The smell of roasted turkey and fresh bread filled every room. Outside, the first snow of the season drifted down in soft flakes. But inside, there was only light and laughter. 1 year had passed since that frozen Thanksgiving night. 1 year since Marlene stood on a cold porch with nowhere to go. 1 year since a stranger in a leather jacket crossed the street and changed everything. Cora carried plates to the table, moving with a steadiness she had not possessed 12 months ago. She was 9 now. She still had hard days. She still woke sometimes from dreams that made her shake. But she also laughed more. She talked more. She trusted more. Ivy followed behind, with napkins folded into shapes she had invented herself. Her drawings covered the walls of the apartment, bright bursts of color in every room. She was working on a new series about flowers and motorcycles, images that made no sense to anyone but made perfect sense to her. Penny bounced between the kitchen and the living room, checking on everything, reporting updates to anyone who would listen. She was 5 now, no longer the silent, trembling child from that night. She still carried Boo everywhere, but she no longer hid behind her mother when strangers approached. Marlene stood at the stove, stirring gravy with one hand and wiping her eyes with the other. She had promised herself she would not cry today. She had already broken that promise twice. Rosa arrived at 4 o'clock with a pie in each hand. Marcus came at 4:30 with Theo beside him. They filled the small apartment with their presence. These people who had once been strangers and were now something closer to family. Earl was the last to arrive. He stood in the doorway for a moment, his leather jacket dusted with snow, his face uncertain. He had not worn the jacket to make a statement. He wore it because it was who he was, and this family had accepted him exactly as he came. Penny ran to him before he could step inside. She grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the table. "You have to sit at the head," she said. "Mama said so." Earl looked at Marlene. She smiled and nodded. He sat down slowly, uncomfortable with the honor. The chair at the head of the table was usually empty in his life. He was not used to being placed at the center of anything. The food was served. The plates were filled. The conversation flowed easily between stories and laughter and quiet moments of connection. Before anyone took a bite, Marlene raised her glass. "Before we eat, I want to do something," she said. "I want each of us to share something we are thankful for." Rosa went first. She spoke about the families she had helped this year, the children who were safe because people chose to act. Marcus shared his gratitude for second chances, for brothers who stood beside him even when he made mistakes. Theo talked about Cora, about watching her heal, about the privilege of being trusted with her story. Ivy said she was thankful for colored pencils. Everyone laughed, but she was completely serious. Penny said she was thankful that Earl came to her school play. She had been the best flower on the stage, and she wanted everyone to know it. Cora was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke. "I am thankful that Mama believed me," she said, "and that I do not have to be scared anymore." Marlene reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. No words were needed. Then all eyes turned to Earl. He sat in silence for what felt like a long time. His jaw was tight. His hands rested on the table, still and heavy. When he spoke, his voice was low. "I am thankful for second chances," he said, "for the chance to protect, for the chance to matter." He paused and looked at the three girls, at Marlene, at the people gathered around this small table, for the chance to belong. The room was quiet. Penny climbed down from her chair and walked over to Earl. She wrapped her arms around his neck and held on tight. No one spoke. No one needed to. They ate together. This family built not from blood, but from choice. The food was warm and the laughter was real, and the apartment felt like everything Marlene had ever dreamed a home could be. As they finished dinner, there was a knock at the door. Marlene wiped her hands and walked across the room. She opened the door and found a woman standing in the hallway. The woman was young, maybe 30. Her face was thin and tired. A bruise darkened the skin beneath her left eye. Beside her stood a little girl, maybe 6 years old, clutching her mother's hand with both of hers. The woman's voice shook when she spoke. "I am sorry to bother you. I heard about your story online. Someone shared a video of the workshop." She swallowed hard. "I did not know where else to go." She looked at Marlene with eyes that held the same fear Marlene had carried 1 year ago on a frozen porch. "Is there room for us too?" Marlene stood in the doorway for only a moment. Then she stepped aside and opened the door wider. "There is always room," she said. "Come in." The woman's name was Janet. Her daughter's name was Sophie. They stepped into the warmth of the apartment, into the circle of people who had gathered around the table. Their story was just beginning. But they would not face it alone. Earl watched from his seat as Marlene guided Janet and Sophie to the couch. He watched as Rosa moved to sit beside them, already asking quiet questions. He watched as Penny brought Sophie a piece of pie without being asked. This was what it looked like. This was what protection meant. Not violence, not force, just showing up, just opening doors, just refusing to look away. 1 year ago, Earl had crossed a snowy street because he could not ignore a child's bare hands turning red in the cold. That single decision had created a chain he could never have imagined. The workshop had spread to other schools in other towns. The video had been watched by thousands. Letters arrived every week, from children who had found the courage to speak and parents who had learned to listen. Cora had begun speaking at school events, sharing her own story in her own words. The first time, her voice had trembled so badly she could barely finish. The second time, it was steadier. By the third, she stood tall at the podium and looked the audience in the eye. Ivy's drawings were displayed in a gallery fundraiser for families in crisis. People paid money to hang her art on their walls, and every dollar went to children who needed help. Penny no longer crossed the street when she saw men in leather jackets. She waved at them instead. The story of that Thanksgiving night had traveled farther than Earl would ever know. In cities he had never visited, bikers gathered to discuss starting their own workshops. In schools he would never see, children practiced safety signals they had learned from a video shared online. In homes he could not imagine, mothers found the strength to leave because they heard about a stranger who opened his door. It was never about one man. It was never about one family. It was about what happens when people choose to see instead of look away. When they choose to act instead of wait for someone else. When they choose to protect instead of pretend, the danger is not real. Earl had spent 30 years believing he was done with the world. He had buried his daughter and his wife and most of his hope. He had built walls so high, he forgot there was anything on the other side. But a little girl's bare hands had broken through. Now he sat in a warm apartment surrounded by people who called him family. He watched Janet and Sophie begin the journey he had helped make possible. He thought about Linda and Sadie, about the promise he had kept, about all the years he had left to keep it. The table was full, the door was open, and somewhere out there another child was learning that it was safe to speak. This was the legacy. Not patches or motorcycles or the fear that strangers felt when they saw him coming. The legacy was Sophie holding a piece of pie. The legacy was Cora standing at a podium. The legacy was every door that opened because someone believed protection was worth the risk. Earl looked around the table at the faces of people he loved. His chest ached with something he almost did not recognize. It had been so long since he felt it. It was hope, earned through survival, rebuilt through trust, shared with everyone who chose to carry it forward. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the warmth held steady, and the story continued, rippling outward into a world that needed it more than anyone could know.